Get that damn tourniquet higher. Now. The words ripped through the dusty, cordite-choked air of the Afghan valley, sharp, desperate. Lieutenant Commander Slater's voice was a steel cable frayed by panic. Below him, pinned behind the crumbling remains of a mud brick wall, Specialist Miller, Viper, was dying. His leg, what was left of it, was a ruin of shredded camouflage and crimson mud. The tourniquet was already cinched as high as it would go, a desperate black band against the pale skin of his upper thigh, but the blood just kept coming. A dark, pulsing flood that soaked into the thirsty ground. "Sir, it's no good," a young SEAL medic screamed over the relentless crack of enemy fire. "The femoral is shredded to high up, the TQ isn't stopping it." Slater slammed his fist into the dirt. "Then put another one on. Do something. Medevac is 20 minutes out." 20 minutes, in this world under this sun, it was an eternity. Viper had maybe 3 minutes, for if he was lucky. His eyes were already glassy, his skin the color of ash. From the other side of the broken wall, Petty Officer Leo Martinez, doc to his teammates, saw it all. He saw the useless tourniquet, he saw the spreading pool of life. He saw the flicker of Viper's soul getting ready to leave his body. And he saw the rigid, by-the-book panic in his commander's eyes. Slater was following the manual, and the manual was getting Viper killed. Doc's mind went quiet, the gunfire faded to a dull hum. The shouting became a distant echo. All he could hear was another voice, a gravelly, patient voice from years ago, echoing from the dusty porch of a Texas farmhouse. "Sometimes, Leo, the book is just a list of all the ways people have already died. Your job is to write the page that lets him live." He moved. It wasn't a decision, it was an instinct. He scrambled over to Viper, ignoring Slater's enraged glare. "Martinez, what the hell do you think you're doing? Get back on that 50 cal. Doc didn't answer. His hands were already at work, ripping open his medkit. He pulled out a packet of Quicklot, a sterile scalpel, and a pair of hemostats, standard issue. But what he was about to do was anything but. "I'm going in, sir," Doc said, his voice eerily calm in the chaos. "I have to find the bleeder and clamp it directly." Slater looked at him as if he'd just started speaking Russian. "You'll do what? You're a corpsman, Martinez, not a goddamn trauma surgeon. You do that, you'll kill him for sure. That's against every protocol we have." Doc locked eyes with his commander. The kid from San Antonio stared down the Annapolis graduate. "Sir, with all due respect, protocol is watching him die. He has 2 minutes, maybe less. I'm not gonna let that happen. I am giving you a direct order, Petty Officer. You stand down." Slater's voice cracked with fury. "You touch him with that scalpel, and I will personally see you court-martialed and thrown out of my Navy." For a heartbeat, the world stopped. Doc looked from Slater's face, contorted with rage and fear, to Viper's, which was slackening into the peaceful, empty mask of death. He thought of his grandfather's calloused hands guiding his own, teaching him how to suture a pig's belly on the farm table. "The rules are for when you have time, Mio. When you don't have time, you have your hands, your gut, and God. Trust him in that order." Doc turned his back on his commander. "I'm sorry, sir," he said, his voice low but clear over the din of battle. "But I can't do that," and with a surgeon's precision, he made the first cut. The flight back to Bagram Airfield was silent, save for the rhythmic hump of the Black Hawk's rotors. Viper was alive, barely. He was packed in ice, pumped full of blood and fluids, a web of tubes and wires connecting him to the beeping machines that were now doing the work his body had given up on. But he was alive. His pulse was thready but steady. The bleeding had stopped. In the organized chaos of the helicopter's cabin, Doc Martinez cleaned his instruments, his hands moving with a slow, deliberate calm that felt alien after the adrenaline of the firefight. He didn't look at anyone, least of all Lieutenant Commander Slater, who sat opposite him, his face a granite mask of cold fury. The moment the skids hit the tarmac, the storm broke. Before the flight surgeon and his team could even get Viper onto the gurney, Slater was in Doc's face. "My office, now." The words were ice. The small, plywood box that served as Slater's command post smelled of stale coffee and sweat. Maps covered one wall, unit commendations another. Slater didn't sit. He paced behind his metal desk like a caged panther. Doc stood at attention, his gaze fixed on a point just over Slater's shoulder. "Do you have any idea what you did out there, Martinez?" Slater began, his voice dangerously low. "I saved his life, sir." The answer, calm and factual, seemed to infuriate Slater even more. He slammed his hand on the desk, making a stack of papers jump. "You disobeyed a direct order in the middle of a firefight. You performed a surgical procedure that you are grossly unqualified for. You risked not only Specialist Miller's life, but the operational integrity of this team. What if you'd failed? What if he'd bled out right there while you were playing doctor? What if your little experiment had taken one more minute and cost us another man to enemy fire?" "It wasn't an experiment, sir. It was a calculated procedure." "Calculated by whom? The ghost of some backwoods country doctor." Slater sneered. "I read your file. I know all about your grandfather, Vietnam-era Green Beret. Some kind of legend in his own mind, teaching you his little tricks. This isn't Vietnam, Martinez. We have rules, we have protocols, they exist for a reason. They exist to keep men from getting killed by well-intentioned cowboys who think they know better." He leaned across the desk, his eyes burning holes in Doc. "As of this moment, you are officially under investigation for insubordination and dereliction of duty. You are grounded. You will be confined to this base. You will not participate in any further operations. You will turn over your weapon and your advanced medical kit to Master Chief Blake. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir." The words were like swallowing glass. "Get out of my sight." Doc walked out into the harsh, white glare of the Afghan sun. The sounds of the base, the distant roar of AC-130, the shouts of men, the clank of machinery felt muffled, distant. His career, the only thing he'd ever wanted, the path he had bled and sacrificed for, was crumbling around him. He found Master Chief Blake by the armory, his face etched with a familiar, weary concern. Blake was the team's anchor, a 20-year veteran who had seen it all. He was a man of few words, but his eyes held the weight of 1,000 missions. "Heard what happened?" Blake said, not as a question. He took Doc's rifle without ceremony. "Give me the kit." Doc handed over the heavy pack, the one filled with the tools of his trade. It felt like handing over a part of himself. "He's going to crucify me, Master Chief." Blake sighed, running a hand over his shaved head. "Slater's a good officer, Doc, but he's rigid. He sees the world in black and white, SOPs and violations. He doesn't have a gear for improvisation." He looked Doc in the eye. "You did the right thing for Viper, but you did the wrong thing for the chain of command. Now we gotta see which one matters more." That night, unable to sleep, Doc pulled out the one thing they couldn't take from him. It was a small, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and soft with age, the cover worn smooth by time and touch, his grandfather's journal. He opened it to a random page, the familiar, spidery handwriting a comfort in the sterile darkness of his bunk. The entry was dated 1968, from a place called Kaysan. "Kid from Alabama got hit in the leg. High up, femoral. Tourniquet was useless. Poured sulfa powder in and went digging with my K-bar. Had to clamp the artery with a pair of needle-nose pliers from the Como guy's toolkit. Everyone said he was a goner. Saw him in Da Nang a month later. He was missing a leg, but he was alive to miss it. They don't teach you that in the manual." Doc closed his eyes, the memory washing over him. He was 16 again, sitting on that Texas porch, the air thick with the smell of dust and honeysuckle. His grandfather, his hands gnarled by arthritis but still impossibly steady, was showing him how to tie a surgeon's knot. "Listen to me, Leo," the old man had said, his voice a low rumble. "They're gonna teach you how to save lives in a clean, well-lit room, with all the right tools, and you need to learn that. Learn it better than anyone. But one day you're gonna be in a muddy hole, in the dark, with nothing but a pocket knife and a prayer. The man next to you will be dying, and the book ain't gonna help you. In that moment you're not just a medic, you're a mechanic. His body is a broken machine, and you gotta do whatever it takes to make it run again. You understand me? Whatever it takes." Doc understood. He had always understood. But as he lay there in the dark, 1,000 miles from home, he wondered if anyone else ever would. The next few days were a special kind of hell. The investigation was formal, and it was cold. A JAG officer, a crisp captain flown in from Kandahar, interviewed Doc for hours in a windowless room. The captain's questions were a relentless barrage of regulations and codes. Petty Officer Martinez, Are you a board-certified surgeon? No, sir. Have you received training in invasive field surgery beyond the standard SOCOM-MEDIC curriculum? I have received informal training, sir. Informal training? From whom? My grandfather, sir. He was an 18 Delta in the 5th Special Forces Group. The captain made a note on his legal pad, his expression unreadable. And you believe this informal training superseded a direct order from your commanding officer during a kinetic engagement? Doc tried to explain the context, the ticking clock. The certainty of Viper's death. He even offered his grandfather's journal as evidence of the procedure's precedent. The captain glanced at the worn leather book with polite disinterest, as if it were a child's diary. The hearing will be scheduled for next week. Until then, the restrictions on your movement and duties remain in place. The isolation was worse than any punishment. He was a ghost on his own base. The other SEALs, his brothers, were torn. A few of the younger guys would give him a quiet nod when they thought no one was looking. They had seen Viper's leg, they knew, but the older, more seasoned operators sided with Slater. Discipline was the bedrock of the teams. You start letting medics ignore orders, no matter how good the reason, and the whole structure rots from the inside out. Slater, for his part, made his position clear in every team briefing, hammering home the importance of protocol and the dangers of a maverick mentality. The message was clear. Doc was the problem. His only visitor was Master Chief Blake, who would stop by his bunk at the end of the day, bringing him a cup of coffee. "Viper's stable," Blake said one evening, his voice low. "They flew him to Landstuhl. He's gonna lose the leg from the knee down. But he's alive. His wife called me. They have a new baby girl he's never met. She wanted me to thank you." Doc just nodded, the words catching in his throat. It was the only thing that mattered. "Don't let Slater get in your head, kid," Blake continued, sensing Doc's despair. "He's not a bad man, he's just scared. Scared of what he can't control. And you, with your grandpa's book of tricks, you're something he can't control. He needs the world to fit in a box. You keep showing him it won't." But the Master Chief's support was a small comfort in a sea of doubt. Doc started to question himself. Had he been arrogant, reckless? Had he just gotten lucky? He spent his days in a forced idleness, cleaning weapons he wasn't allowed to carry, and inventorying medical supplies he wasn't allowed to use. He watched the helicopters take off for missions he should have been on, a hollow ache in his chest. He was a SEAL who couldn't fight, a medic who couldn't heal. He was nothing. The morning of his 4th day of confinement started like any other. The same metallic taste of powdered eggs, the same oppressive sun climbing over the distant mountains, and then the world exploded. It wasn't a single blast, it was a symphony of destruction. The first whistling shriek was a mortar round, landing with a deafening crump near the motor pool, sending a geyser of dirt and shrapnel into the air. Before the echoes faded, another hit the comms tower. Then another, and another, a coordinated, accurate barrage. Sirens blared to life across the fob, a desperate, wailing cry that was almost drowned out by the thunder of the explosions. Through the window of the mess hall, Doc saw men running, scrambling for cover, their bodies silhouetted against flashes of orange fire. The familiar crackle of small arms fire erupted from the perimeter, not the sporadic potshots of a lone sniper, but the sustained, rolling thunder of a full-scale assault. Doc's training kicked in before he could even think. He was already moving, running not for cover, but towards the sound of the chaos. He was grounded, stripped of his duties, but he was still Doc. And men were getting hurt. He was halfway to the main tactical operations center when it took a direct hit from an RPG. The plywood building disintegrated in a flash of light and a cloud of splinters. The shockwave knocked Doc off his feet. He lay there for a second, his ears ringing, the air tasting of dust and burning electronics. And then came the screams. The screams were what cut through the fog. Men were hurt, badly. Doc scrambled to his feet and ran towards the wreckage. Just as he reached the smoking crater where the talk had been, a second RPG hit the building next to it. The primary aid station, the medical bay. He watched in horror as the roof collapsed inwards, followed by a sickening billow of black smoke, the base's surgeon. The primary medical supplies, all of it gone. In that moment, Doc Martinez knew. The formal investigation, Slater's anger, his own uncertain future, none of it mattered anymore. The rulebook wasn't just unhelpful now, it was burning. The FOB was on its own. and he was the only real medic left standing. Chaos reigned. The base was a hornet's nest kicked over. Mortar rounds continued to rain down, their impacts walking a path of destruction across the compound. From the perimeter walls, the heavy thud of the .50 caliber machine guns was answered by the sharp, angry cracks of enemy Dragonovs, snipers. They were pinned down, besieged. Doc, fueled by pure adrenaline, became the calm center of the storm. The mess hall. He bellowed to a couple of shell-shocked Marines, stumbling out of the ruined talk. "Get the wounded to the mess hall. It's the most fortified building we've got left. Go." He didn't have a kit, but he had his hands and his knowledge. He used t-shirts for bandages, belts for tourniquets, and his own voice as a tool to triage the wounded, sorting the walking wounded from the dying with a brutal efficiency born of necessity. Men were being dragged in from every corner of the base, their bodies torn by shrapnel and bullets. The floor of the mess hall, where he'd eaten breakfast just an hour before, was quickly becoming slick with blood. He was working on a young private with a sucking chest wound, using the plastic wrapper from a pack of MRS to create a makeshift chest seal, when he saw Master Chief Blake organizing a defense near the entrance. "I need my kit, Master Chief," Doc yelled over the din. Blake didn't hesitate. He grabbed a spare medkit from a destroyed ambulance and tossed it to him. "You're the head doctor now, son. Keep him alive." Meanwhile, Lieutenant Commander Slater was proving why he was in command. Fear and uncertainty were his enemies, and he fought them with action. He rallied a team of SEALs, his voice cutting through the noise, issuing clear, concise orders. "They're trying to breach the west wall. Thompson, you and your team suppress that sniper's nest on the ridge. Davis, I want our PGs on that technical pulling up to the main gate. Move, move, move." Slater was everywhere, a whirlwind of controlled fury, directing fire, plugging gaps in the defense, his M for spitting fire. He was leading from the front, exactly as he was trained to do. He and a small fire team were laying down suppressing fire near a breach in the western perimeter wall when the world turned white. An RPG, fired from close range, slammed into the concrete barrier just above his head. The explosion was immense. It didn't just throw him, it lifted him off his feet and hurled him a dozen yards through the air like a rag doll. He landed in a heap against the twisted metal frame of a burned-out Humvee. His men screamed his name, dragging him out of the line of fire and back towards the relative safety of the mess hall. He was conscious, but his face was a mask of agony. His right leg, was a horror. It wasn't blown off, but it was trapped, mangled by the force of the blast against the Humvee's frame. A large piece of jagged metal shrapnel was embedded deep in his calf, and the entire lower leg was swelling at an alarming, impossible rate, the fabric of his pants straining at the seams. They laid him on a makeshift gurney of 2 tables pushed together in the center of the mess hall. A young medic, his hands shaking, tried to assess the damage. "Sir, I don't know," the medic stammered, looking up at Doc, his eyes wide with panic. "There's no major arterial bleed, but the swelling, it's like a balloon. His pulse in his foot is gone. It's a crush injury, a bad one." Doc pushed through the crowd. He took one look at Slater's leg, and his blood ran cold. The skin was taut and shiny, a grotesque, discolored purple. It was rock hard to the touch. He knew exactly what it was. He could almost hear his grandfather's voice in his ear, calm and steady. "Compartment syndrome, Leo. The muscle is bleeding inside the sheath. The pressure builds up, cuts off all the blood flow. It's a ticking clock. You wait, the muscle dies. The toxins build up, kills the limb. Then it kills the man. You got maybe a few hours. If you're lucky. Medevac is a no-go," Master Chief Blake said, appearing at Doc's shoulder. His face was grim. "We're completely socked in. This assault is a major one. No bird is getting in or out of here until we break this siege." The young medic looked at Doc. "We need to get him to a surgeon. They're the only ones who can relieve the pressure. Otherwise he'll lose the leg, for sure." Doc looked at Slater. The commander was fading, his breathing shallow, his skin slick with a cold sweat. He wasn't just losing his leg, he was going into shock. The toxins from the dying muscle were already poisoning his system. They didn't have a few hours, they had minutes. Doc felt the weight of every eye in the room on him. He was the one under investigation. He was the one Slater wanted to throw out of the Navy, and now, Slater's life was in his hands. He looked at the mangled leg, then at the combat knife on his belt. There was only one option, one procedure. The one his grandfather called the last resort of the damned. A fasciotomy, slicing the leg open from knee to ankle to relieve the pressure. A brutal, dangerous surgical procedure, meant to be performed in a sterile operating room by a team of surgeons, not in a dusty, bloody mess hall with a combat knife. Doc took a deep, shuddering breath. He looked at Master Chief Blake. "There's no other way," Doc said, his voice barely a whisper. "I have to open his leg, right now." The young medic recoiled, as if he'd been slapped. "You can't. That's surgery. We don't have the gear, the anesthesia. You'll cripple him, or kill him from the shock." The room fell silent. Even the gunfire outside seemed to fade away. Every SEAL, every Marine, every soldier in that makeshift aid station turned to look at the disgraced corpsman and the dying commander. This was the moment, the choice. Follow the rules and watch a man die, or break every rule in the book for the slimmest chance of saving him. Doc looked down at Slater. The commander's eyes fluttered open, hazy with pain. He saw Doc. He saw the knife in Doc's hand. He couldn't speak, but his eyes pleaded. It wasn't a plea to stop. It was a plea to try. That was all Doc needed. He turned to the stunned men around him. His voice was no longer a whisper. It was a command, clear, confident, unwavering. "I need iodine, all of it, and I need a lighter. And for if you big bastards are going to hold him down and not let go, no matter how much he screams, Master Chief, I need you to talk to him. Keep him with us. The rest of you give us light." The men, who moments before had been staring in shocked disbelief, now moved with purpose. Their training took over. They had their orders. Flashlights materialized, their beams cutting through the dim, dusty light of the mess hall, all focusing on Slater's grotesque leg. 4 of the biggest SEALs on the team took their positions, their hands gripping Slater's shoulders and his good leg. Doc worked with a speed and focus that was almost terrifying to watch. He poured the bottle of iodine over the blade of his crowbar, the brown liquid dripping onto the floor. He flicked the lighter, the small flame dancing in the darkness, and ran the steel through it, sterilizing it in the fire. The smell of burning iodine filled the air. He knelt beside Slater. He placed a hand on his commander's chest. "Sir Commander, I'm going to do everything I can to save your leg and your life. But this is going to hurt more than anything you've ever felt. Do you understand me?" Slater, his jaw clenched, managed a single, sharp nod. Master Chief Blake leaned in close to Slater's ear. "Stay with me, Skipper. Don't you dare check out on me. Think about your wife. Think about your kids. You're gonna walk out of here. You hear me?" Doc took one last, deep breath, centering himself. The world narrowed to the beam of light on Slater's swollen skin, the cool weight of the knife in his hand, and the memory of his grandfather's voice. "No hesitation, Leo. Find your line. One deep, clean cut. You hesitate, you'll do more damage. Be brave for him." He placed the tip of the knife against the skin just below Slater's knee. "Hold him," Doc said, his voice as cold and sharp as the steel he held. And then he cut. Slater's body arched off the table. A raw, inhuman scream was torn from his throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony that echoed through the mess hall and seemed to silence even the battle outside. The men holding him down strained, their knuckles white, their own faces masks of horror and determination. But Doc didn't flinch. His hand was steady as he drew the blade down the length of Slater's calf in a single, deep, fluid motion. The effect was instantaneous and grotesque. The taut skin split open, and the muscle beneath, strangled and swollen to a dark, angry purple, bulged out of the incision. It was like slitting the casing on an overstuffed sausage. A wave of dark, venous blood and fluid wept from the wound. Another one on the other side. Doc grunted, already repositioning the knife. Again, the scream. Again, the steady, unflinching cut. The second incision released even more pressure. The immediate danger was over. The pressure was relieved. But the procedure wasn't finished. "We need to keep it clean," Doc ordered, his mind racing. He grabbed saline bags, flushing the open wounds, his hands moving with an intricate knowledge that seemed impossible. He packed the wounds with sterile gauze, his movements economical and precise. He worked in a bubble of intense concentration, oblivious to the groans of the other wounded, the shouts from the perimeter, the percussive thud of mortar landing ever closer. For 10 minutes that stretched into an eternity, he worked. Finally, he wrapped the leg loosely in bandages. He pressed his fingers against the top of Slater's foot. Nothing. He repositioned his fingers, pressing harder, searching. And then he felt it, faint, thready, but it was there, a pulse. "Got a pedal pulse," he said, the words coming out in a rush of exhausted relief. He looked up at Master Chief Blake, his face smudged with dirt and blood, his eyes burning with an intensity Blake had never seen before. "He's gonna keep the leg." Just as he spoke, the roar of the gunfire outside began to change. The frantic, desperate defense was turning into a coordinated, aggressive counterattack. The sound of an A-10 Warthog ripped through the sky overhead, followed by the terrifying bird of its Gatling gun chewing up the enemy positions on the ridge. The siege was breaking. A runner burst into the mess hall, his face beaming. "Choppers are inbound. QRF is 5 minutes out. We pushed them back." A ragged cheer went through the room. Men clapped each other on the back, relief washing over their exhausted faces. The medevac helicopter landed a few minutes later, its rotors kicking up a storm of dust. The flight surgeon and his team rushed in, their faces a mixture of professional calm and shock at the scene of carnage. They stopped dead when they saw Slater. The flight surgeon, a Navy commander, knelt and looked at the expertly dressed but brutal-looking wounds on Slater's leg. Who did this fasciotomy?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Every head in the room, SEAL and Marine alike, turned to look at Doc Martinez, who was quietly cleaning his knife in the corner. The surgeon stared at Doc, then back at the leg, then at the strong, steady pulse reading on his monitor. "Whoever you are, you just saved his life, and his career." As they loaded Slater onto the helicopter, his pain was now managed by a morphine drip, but his eyes were clear. They found Doc in the crowd. For a long moment, the two men just looked at each other. Slater, the commander who had threatened to end Doc's career. Doc, the medic who had disobeyed him to save another, and then disobeyed every rule to save him. Slater couldn't speak, but he lifted his hand, just an inch off the gurney, and gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was a gesture that spoke more than 1,000 words. It was an admission, a thank you, a surrender. It was respect. The weeks that followed were a blur. The official investigation into Doc's actions during the initial firefight was reopened, but this time, the context was entirely different. The story of what happened during the siege had become legend on the base. The tale of the grounded medic who took command of the chaos and performed battlefield surgery with a combat knife was told in hushed, reverent tones. The key testimony came from an unexpected source. From his hospital bed in Germany, Lieutenant Commander Slater, his leg saved and his recovery underway, submitted a 4-page, handwritten report. He recounted every detail of the siege, not sparing himself. He wrote of his own rigidity, his fear-driven adherence to a manual that was irrelevant in the face of overwhelming catastrophe. And then he wrote about Doc. Petty Officer Martinez displayed a level of courage, ingenuity, and medical expertise that I have never before witnessed, he wrote. His actions were in direct violation of my orders and in violation of standard operating procedure. And had he obeyed either, I and several other men would be dead today. He did not act as a maverick, he acted as a true healer, making impossible decisions under unimaginable pressure. He adapted, he overcame, he did what SEALs are supposed to do. Any disciplinary action against this man would be a disgrace to the uniform and a detriment to the operational readiness of the naval special warfare community. I am not recommending the charges be dropped. I am recommending Petty Officer Martinez be awarded the Navy Cross for his gallantry and valor. The recommendation, coming from the very man who had initiated the investigation, was a bombshell. It was backed by a chorus of similar statements from Master Chief Blake and every other man who had been in that mess hall. The charges against Doc were not just dropped, they were expunged from his record. 2 months later, back in Coronado, California, under a perfect blue sky, Leo Doc Martinez stood at attention. His dress whites were immaculate. His family, flown in from Texas, sat in the front row, his grandfather in his old Green Beret uniform, a single tear tracing a path through the wrinkles on his cheek. The Admiral pinned the Navy Cross, the nation's second highest award for valor, to Doc's chest. The citation was read aloud, recounting his heroism, but for Doc, the real reward came later. He was summoned to the office of the top commander for naval special warfare. The admiral didn't waste time with small talk. "Son, what you did out there, it's making us rethink a lot of things," the admiral said. Slater was right. The book isn't always enough. We need men who can write new pages when the situation demands it. We're putting together a new course at the center. Adaptive Combat Medicine. We're throwing out the old curriculum. We want to build something new, from the ground up. Something based on ingenuity, improvisation on the lessons learned in the mud. We want you to help us build it. We want you to teach it. And so it began. Doc, the young medic who had almost been thrown out of the Navy, was now tasked with rewriting its doctrine. His first act was to fly to Texas. He spent a week on his grandfather's porch, not as a student anymore, but as a peer. They sat for hours, the old man and the young man, to generations of warrior healers, talking, sharing stories, and filling the pages of a new journal. The final scene of this chapter of his life didn't take place in a dusty valley or a bloody mess hall, but in a clean, quiet classroom in Coronado. A new generation of SEAL medics, young, eager, and strong, sat before him. Doc Martinez stood at the lectern. He wasn't wearing his medals. In his hand, he held the worn, leather-bound journal that had belonged to his grandfather. He opened it. "Good morning," he began, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "The first thing you're going to learn in this class is that everything you've learned so far might get you killed. The books you've read are important. The regulations are there for a reason. But they are a foundation, not a cage. Today, we're not going to start with a regulation. We're going to start with a story. It begins in a place called Kaysan, in 1968. He paused, looking at the faces before him, seeing the same fire and hope he once had. "The most important tool you will ever carry into battle," he said, tapping the worn journal, "isn't in your med kit. It's the wisdom of those who bled before you, and the courage to listen to it when everyone else is telling you to stick to the book." This story is a powerful reminder that true courage isn't always about following orders. Sometimes, it's about having the conviction to do what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. It's about honoring the timeless wisdom passed down from our mentors and having the guts to apply it when it matters most. We've all had a mentor in our lives, a grandparent, a teacher, a coach, someone who taught us a lesson that couldn't be found in any textbook. Who was that person for you? Share a story about a piece of wisdom they gave you in the comments below. Let's fill this space with tributes to the unsung heroes who shaped us. And if this story of courage and conviction moved you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel. We have so many more stories like this to share with you. Thank you for watching.